Hi everyone, and welcome to the last MWF webinar of 2023. Today, we'll take a retrospective look over some of the improvements and new features that were added throughout MWF builds, which were released in 2023. We'll be looking at features which span MWF build 8444, 8560, and 8675. We'll be looking at features such as the bearing beam updates, floor module improvements, disassemble wall tool, horizontal split, and split sheathing, just to name a few. I'll start off by looking at the bearing beam updates, and as you can see on my screen, I have a panel, and I'm just going to demonstrate the new tool that was added to the bearing option. So previously, we had options for bearing top of panel and bearing top of opening, which would place a bearing beam at the top of our opening. We now have a new addition, which allows us to place a bearing beam at the bottom of the panel. So if I go into my panel properties, go to miscellaneous and bearing, you'll see within our bearing menu, under placement, we have top of opening, top of panel, and the new addition, which was bottom of panel. This tool is only supported for the whole panel at the moment. We're not able to use this with the all spans option or a specific opening. So we can use this for whole panel. I'll select close and click OK. As you can see, this is the new bearing option, which allows us to place the bearing left to right at the bottom of the panel. Next, we have the floor module improvements. So if I just go into my floor module, we can take a look at the new addition to floors. So originally with our panel members, we could flip these 180 degrees using a flipped option. Now we have a new option that allows us to rotate the panel members in 90-degree increments. So if I wanted to rotate it 90 degrees, I now have the option to do so. This option is now available for tracks and joists as well. So we've got this new angle option, which allows us to choose rotation angle. And if I set that to 90 degrees, I can rotate it at 90 degrees. If we wanted to flip it 180 degrees, we still have the original flipped option here, but we have these new additions. So I'll click OK and OK again, and you will notice that the panel joists have now been flipped 90 degrees. Next, we have the Disassemble wall tool, which was introduced in MWF build 8560. So for the Disassemble wall tool, it will allow us to break the wall at the layer functions. So what that means is we'll be able to split the walls based on the position of the layers in relation to the core boundary. So if we take a look at the wall composition and the wall structure, you'll see in this case we have 3 layers inside of this wall. We have a finish layer on the exterior side of the core boundary. We have a finish layer on the interior side of the core boundary, and we have a layer that sits in between the core boundary, which is our structural layer in this case. So when we use the Disassemble wall tool, we'll have 3 options based on the position of these layers in relation to the core boundary. To enable the Disassemble wall tool, I'll go to MWF, into the Tools menu, where we'll find Disassemble wall in the list. We're presented with a warning or a message that gives us a heads up to say Revit walls will be divided at the core layer and additional wall types will be created and joined. In the dialog box, you can see on the left we have a preview of our wall, so the existing wall. Next to that, we have the wall types which could be created. So we have 3 options here based on the finish layer on the exterior of core, so the one on the exterior side of the core boundary, the layer based on the interior side of the core boundary, and the layer that sits in between the core boundary. So you can see we have 3 different options here. In the table on the right, you can see as I hover over each row of data, it gives me an indication based on which layer I'm referring to in the preview on the left. So you can see this is our structural layer. And also on the right, we have the type function, which also gives us an indication which layer we're referring to when we create our wall types. So I'm going to select all 3 walls. And you can see in the table, it gives us an indication which wall types will be generated. So I'll click OK, and it's disassembled the wall. And as we take a closer look, you can see that our wall is now made up of 3 separate layers. So we've got sheathed interior of core, we have our structural layer, which is the core, and then we have exterior of core. One of the great things about this tool is now that we've disassembled the wall, we can now modify the structural layer independent of those sheathing layers. So what I can do is I can match my walls types. So for the walls that are either side of the disassembled wall, I can now match the structural layer to the walls either side. So I'm going to use my match properties tool from Revit and just match the wall type. I'm then going to go to my plan view or into the plan view where I can then join the walls just to make sure they're treated as one continuous wall from left to right. I can then simply regenerate the panel. And that will allow my stud members to be placed continuously left to right throughout the panel. Another thing that works well with the disassemble tool is now that our sheathing boards are separate from the structural layer, we can now modify these and edit them independent of the wall. So if the sheathing was to span from the bottom of the ground floor all the way to the top of our second floor or third floor, for example, we can modify the sheathing independently and separately to make those changes. Next, we have the horizontal split tool. And with the horizontal split tool, we can split by level and we can split by reference plane. Previously, we did have an option that would allow us to split our panels horizontally, but this would include the use of a split marker in order to split the panels. Now we can do the same thing, but this time we can choose a level or a reference plane instead. So I'm going to select my Revit wall first, go to MWF, into my markers menu, and I've got my split tool, horizontal split tool. In the horizontal split menu, we have 2 options. So we can split by selecting a reference in a table format, and we have the option to pick a level graphically on screen. So if I was to select a level, for example, I could say pick a level, and I can pick one of the levels which are visible in my view. So I'll say split at level 2, and you'll notice that this has now split my wall into 2 separate walls. If I reactivate the tool, you'll see for the second option, we have the option to choose from a table which level that we want to use to split, and if we have any reference planes available, which reference plane we want to split these levels at. We can choose one level, or we can choose multiple levels in order to split. Just for today, I'll just select level 2, and again, we'll split this at level 2. So you can see that that has worked that way. Next, we have the split sheathing tool. So the split sheathing tool was updated in MWF build 8560, where we can now modify our sheathing and we can split the sheathing boards into smaller panels. So this tool is found within the wall multi-layer menu because our sheathing boards are treated as a multi-layer element. And under operations, you'll find near the bottom of the list, we have our sheathing modification tools. At the top of the sheathing options, we have split sheathing panel. And if I click on this option here, you'll notice our first prompt is to select a sheathing panel to split. So I can choose any one of the panels on the interior or external side, wherever there's a sheathing board placed. I can pick a point within the panel. So I can select my panel first of all, then choose a specific point of reference. Based on the point that I've selected, you'll see I've got the option to choose whether I want to split horizontally or vertically. In this case, I'll split the panel horizontally, and you can see that we now have 2 separate panels. Just like before, I can activate the tool and I can split vertically as well. So I'll click split sheathing panel, choose my panel, select a reference point in alignment with a stud. As you can see, it does pick up on those references, and I can just say split the panel along that reference. If I'd like to save these modifications that I've made to the sheathing, then I can go to my operations, and we have the Edit Ones tool, which works specifically for those secondary members in the panel. So I'll click Edit Ones, and I can choose the categories that I want to save. I'll just leave everything selected, and it will save those edits that I've made to the panel. All that's left to do now is to regenerate the panel for the changes to take effect and for them to show or still remain in the panel. So again, I can choose the categories to regenerate, and I'll select everything. As you can see, those modifications remain within the panel, and our panels now have new data based on the new panels that have been created. Okay. So next up are the modular improvements. And the improvements to this tool were introduced in MWF build 8560 and now give us more flexibility when setting a panel or collection of panels as parent panels. So the modular tool allows us to distribute the same panel properties and panel settings to model groups that share the same characteristics. So here I have my model group, which is type 1, and I have type 1 here as well. So both of the same model group. We have type 2 and again another type 2. What we can do is we can designate one of these groups as the parent panel or as the source panels. So if I first of all go to MWF and say quick create, then that's just going to panelize those walls for me. And you can see we've got panel 80 and panel 81. Now, if I wanted to use the same settings on my second group here, which is also type 1, I can use the tools to copy members on all identical groups. So if I select this group first, go to Modular and say copy on all identical groups, then we're presented with this dialog box where we can choose to set the panel as the parent panel. So we can set the source panel, which is the one that was originally created, as the parent panel. And that means this will be the original place where these panels were created or the first panels were created. Now we have the option to lock our panels to the parent panel. And that means the settings within the panel, so the child panels which are created from the parent panel, would have to be matching the parent panel properties. So when we say lock panels, they will pretty much be saved to the parent panel template. So I'll say lock panels and click OK. And you'll see the panels are locked. You can see the red overlay just to let us know that these panels are now locked to the template or the parent panel settings. Our child panels, which have been created from the parent, now contain data to tell us that these are from the parent panel. So if I go to the instance properties of my selected panel 82, you can see when I scroll down, we've got our panel 82, and at the bottom here we've got the BIMSF parent group, which is telling us that this was panel 80. So the original panel was panel 80, and panel 82 is showing the same properties as panel 80. Under panel, BIMSF child group, you can see we have an asterisk here just to tell us that this is a child panel, and also the information to tell us the parent from which it originated. If we would like to make a change to a panel that has been locked to a parent, we have the match properties tool, which would allow us to do that. But if I was to try and make a change to this panel by selecting the panel itself, going into properties, you'll see that we're presented with a warning to tell us that this panel is locked to a template and we need to unlock it before making a change. So now we have the choice to say, do not lock to parent, where we can make changes to the panel and still maintain the data to tell us where it originated. Okay, so if I wanted to make a change to the panel, I could go to parent panel, go into the properties, and make a quick change. So for example, I could add a horizontal member from start to finish. You can see we've made that change. And then I've got the option of using the modular tool to say match properties on all identical groups. And of course, we set it as a parent. And you can see now that panel 82 matches the properties of panel 80 and still has that data to tell us that it was referring to panel 80. Now, with the ability to unlock the panel from the template, or at least not lock it to the parent panel, we have the freedom and flexibility of making modifications to the panel without being restricted to having it locked to template or locked to the parent panels. So what I'll do first of all is say quick create. Just like before, you can see we've got our panels. And if I wanted to copy the settings from a group that's previously been generated, I can go to MWF, Modular, and I'll just say copy members from group and choose the group that I want to copy the properties from. Again, we're presented with the tools that allow us to lock to the parent panel. We can set the panel as a parent, and this time I'll choose not to lock the panels. Again, it's going to generate those members for me, and they will match the properties of the parent panel. And if we look at the properties for panel 86, for example, you'll see here panel 86. Again, it gives us the information based on the parent group, and it tells us that this is a child group from a parent. This time, if I wanted to make a change, I can go into MWF, Properties, and for example, I could turn off the label, just a very simple change. And this time I'm not presented with that warning to tell me that I can't make a change to the panel. So now I've got the flexibility of changing the panel properties, but still understanding where the panel originally originated from. So now if we take a look at the Change Panel Workset tool, this tool was updated in MWF build 8675, where we now take into consideration multi-layer features within our panels. Previously, the way the tool would work is that we'd have a wall and we'd have our panel hosted within the wall. And if that was a multi-layer panel, when we use the Change Panel Workset tool, the single layer framing would move across to the wall's workset, but the multi-layer elements wouldn't move across along with those single layer framing elements. So now in the latest update, we can now move those elements across with the structural elements within the panel. So if I tab to my wall, you'll see that my wall is on my walls workset. And if we look at the framing members, you'll see that we have, sorry about this, our top track, which is sitting within the framing workset, as you can see here. So what I want to do is move our panel elements or our framing elements into the walls workset. So I'm going to select part of the panel. I'm going to go to MWF, and within edits, we have the Change Panel Workset tool. Once I select this, you'll see that the selected element is now on the walls workset, along with the sheathing and other elements within the panel as well. So they've all moved across to the walls workset altogether. Okay. Next, we have the vertical split tool, which again has been updated in 8675. So the vertical split tool, again, is another multi-layer update, and we can see that that has been updated in MWF build 8675. So previously, when we were to split a panel, if the panel was a multi-layer panel, we'd notice that when we split the wall, the panel would stop at the first segment of the wall. So it would stop at the first split marker. Now we've improved the tool, so we can now take into consideration multi-layer walls. And when we have a split marker, those multi-layer walls will be generated throughout the panel and not stop at that first marker. So I'll select my wall first of all, and I'm going to go to my MWF tab, and I'm going to just enable my quick create. As you can see on our panel, we do have some split markers. And before I just generate those panels, you can see that we have a split marker here and a split marker showing at this location as well. We also have some join markers, which will generate some studs based on the join marker that's placed at this location. So I'll click on the wall, go to MWF, Operations, and I'll simply say Quick Create. As we're generating a multi-layer panel, you'll notice the panels are generated throughout the wall and they don't stop at the first marker like they previously did. Okay. Next, we have the download center. So within the download center, this was added to MWF build 8560, and we can find it within our MWF settings at the bottom of the list. So once I click on download center, it takes me to a dialog box where we can refresh the library to show us the latest families that are available. We can see our families in a tree view where we can go through the list. As the families are sorted into categories, we can go to a specific category to load those families that we need, only when we need them. So for example, if I go to walls, you can see we can go further down the list, looking specifically at framing components, or I can click into that level where it will show me all the families within that folder. If I wanted to find a specific family, I have a search box where I could say, show me my clips, and it will show me the clip families that are available. And I can select a clip, for example, and you'll see on the right-hand side, this one is selected and ready to load into my project. We can also change the way the information is displayed. So we have our view layout where we can change it to a list view. You can see we have data related to the families, the date that it was made, and we can also favorite them if we want to. We've got list with preview, and we have the thumbnail option. If you wanted to apply filters, you can filter to show specific families which are categorized as families, markers, texts, template, or other. So for example, if I click on family, you'll see it will load to show me only those family elements. We can choose to select all. So if you do go to a folder and you need all the elements, you can say select all, in which case all the elements will be selected. And you can see at the top here, it gives us an indication of how many elements we have selected. And we can also say select none and cherry pick the elements that we want to load in. If there are multiple elements which span a number of pages, we can go to the next page and see other elements on other pages if we would like to do that. And when I click next, it's going to allow me to select the family types that I want to load into my project. So within that family, I have two types, and I may want to load in both types. Again, you can see some data related to these families. And once you're happy with the families you've got selected, click OK. And that will load the families into your project. So that's the download center. So we've covered bearing beam updates, floor module improvements, disassemble wall tool, horizontal split, split sheathing, modular improvements, change panel workset, vertical split, and the download center. These are only a number of changes that were made throughout 2023. There are many more which I haven't gone through today, but they are available in our webinars and tech tips which we've produced throughout the year. All that's left to do now, guys, is to say have a great day, and thanks for listening.